So thank you all for being here. It is such a pleasure to have alumni come back to talk to us about the career paths that they have taken since they left the IS program. My name is Erik Owens. I'm the director of the IS program these days. Our illustrious alum are back to talk to us today about career paths that they've taken related to NGOs, think tanks, and intergovernmental organizations of different sorts. This is a broad catch-all that we're starting with here to bring a really interesting and diverse group of people together. In the future, we'll be doing more specific, particular career and professional events online. It's one of the things that the COVID-19 crisis has pushed us to go online, but in fact, it actually provides some opportunities as well to bring people together that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have on campus for these conversations. So I want to start by thanking all of you alumni and the many dozens of others who offered their help for today and who will be joining us at other meetings and other alumni career conversations in the future. So thank you so much. And the second thing is that our conversation today is meant to be an opening for students, an invitation, a view into the career paths that you've chosen and some of the lessons you've learned, but also all of the people on this call, all of the alumni, have offered themselves up to meet with students one-on-one or to exchange ideas through Eagle Exchange or LinkedIn or email or something like that. And so our conversation today is as much an invitation for future as it is information today. And we look forward to that conversation today. I will let the individuals introduce themselves, but I'll simply say that they'll take 5 or 6 minutes to begin by talking a bit about their pathway from the International Studies program at BC to where they are now, talk a little bit about the positions that they're holding now, and then offer any words of wisdom or guidance or reflections on that they've picked up along the way. And then we'll save the last 20 minutes or so for conversation among ourselves and with the faculty and students who are joining us here. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here. And Katie, since you had the honor of logging in first, why don't I have you get started?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Katie Fantaguzzi, and I'm calling in from Houston today. I currently work at an organization called the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative Foundation, and this organization is based in London. And it's a pretty small group of people, but the work that we do is we treat school children in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, 16 countries there, who have parasitic worms. And we go to the schools and we provide donated drugs to them, and we basically cure and eradicate these worm infections kind of once. It's just a one pill and you're done. So it's very cost effective. And actually SCI, although it's really small, has been consistently ranked as one of the most cost effective charities in the world. And my role there is that I do monitoring and evaluation. So my job is to take the data that we collect on these programs and demonstrate the impact to the country governments who are doing a lot of this work on our behalf, and also to potential donors and to the public in general to talk about the important work that we do. How did I get here? Well, it was a bit of a winding road from the BC, from the International Studies program. I didn't end up straight into global public health. I left the Heights and I returned back to Houston and I took a job, as we all do. And I think probably a lot of the students are going to find themselves in this place where the things that they would love to do, the ideal job that they'd love to have, might not be available right after graduation. And so I did the thing, I kind of bit the bullet, and I took a job doing healthcare consulting, which was decidedly domestic in nature. So I was working to advise US large employers on the health programs that they offered to their employee populations. So going to big employers and telling them basically how their medical plans should run. And of course, that's only going to work in the US because our healthcare system is very particular, very specific. So I ended up doing that for about 7 years, and I was advancing in my career. I was doing really well. I was getting promoted. The pay was really good, but I just felt like it's not what I want to be doing. This isn't really getting me excited about going to work. So what can I do? I mean, am I going to just do this for the rest of my career? Maybe switch organizations, or what am I going to do? And I decided that I would maybe try and pivot this experience that I have into something new. And so I did a grad program. I did a master's in public health at a school in London called the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I focused on public health, global public health, with a focus in health economics. And from there, after doing that program, I ended up taking this job with the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative. And I feel like this is a much better fit for me. It takes the experience that I had doing consulting, but it allows me to do this on an international level. And so I'm really happy with where I am, but I'm excited to talk to the students today and my peers here about how, you know, we can take maybe something that isn't our ideal and turn it into a future step for growth.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. It's great to hear, and I think I completely agree that many, if not most, students will find themselves serendipitously moving through jobs and careers until they find that thing, and hopefully they do find that. So thank you very much, Katie. That's a terrific start. Lucas, can you go next for us?
Absolutely. So I, in this group, am, I guess, a bit of a misfit. I don't work for an NGO or an INGO or a think tank. I work for a social enterprise. We call ourselves for profit, for purpose, which I think accurately captures kind of what we are in spirit. So the social enterprise is called Nova Pioneer. It is a school network based in South Africa that was founded in 2015. With a vision of opening 100 innovative schools across the continent over the next decade. So today we operate 13 schools between South Africa and Kenya, and kind of in the most ambitious terms, what we're trying to do, the goal is to transform education on the continent. And that's through our focus on inquiry-based learning, on kind of rigorous professional development for teachers, and on a curriculum that produces critical thinkers, innovators, leaders, rather than just kind of what's a little bit more traditional and more common on the continent and in many places around the world, is a focus on kind of cogs in the wheel for the industrial economy, right? So I joined in 2017, currently serve as head of talent, basically human resources for South Africa. But as with any startup, I've been asked to wear many hats and have served in many roles over the last few years. So cut across talent, but also finance and marketing. I've been living in South Africa during this time. It's been the most wonderful, beautiful, inspiring experience. It's a really extraordinary place. And sadly had to leave at the outbreak of the crisis as the country was going on lockdown. And so about a month ago, moved back to be with family in California. But it actually, the timing wasn't so bad because I was actually planning on moving on from Nova Pioneer in May anyway. As I'll be attending business school at Stanford starting in September. So taking a little bit of time off before starting business school, and also hope this fall while I'm in school to apply for a public policy degree to add that on and to add an extra year as a joint degree with that program. So that's where I am today. My path was also not necessarily a traditional one coming out of the IS program. It has certainly shades of Katie's story. So I spent kind of a lot of my time at BC thinking I wanted to go into the foreign service. And I ended up having a public sector internship, I believe after my junior year, and had a couple mentors there who encouraged me not to start my career in the public sector. They said if I did, you know, in an entry level role, I would be challenged to find growth and responsibility and challenge. And so ultimately decided to take any opportunity where I thought I could learn the most, get the most of those things. And so like Katie and many other liberal arts majors looking to change the world, I ended up in consulting and did management consulting with Deloitte for about 2 years. And I say that, you know, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, right, about changing the world, but it really was exactly what I was looking for. Like, worked with great people, traveled the country, learned a lot, developed a pretty practical skill set that would translate to other kinds of work, and has really set me up for what I do today. And so I honestly would recommend kind of anyone who doesn't have a crystal clear career path, just go into consulting. Like it's not a bad plan. But what I would say with one major caveat, if you do take maybe a detour out of kind of the work that you strictly feel like you're passionate about and want to do, just don't lose sight of the plan, right? So if you're passionate about doing work in foreign affairs or, you know, internationally, whatever that space is that you're interested in, keep that in the back of your mind and continue to do little things that are going to keep you engaged with that world. Read The Economist, continue practicing a language, meet with people who work in the space that you think you're interested in, because you just kind of never know when that opportunity is going to present itself. So once I got out of Deloitte what I had hoped to get out of it, kind of as soon as that happened, like literally when I became eligible to take a sabbatical, that same day I was leaving to join Nova Pioneer, to do work that I felt was purposeful and international in scope. And because I'd been thinking about it, preparing for it, I was ready to take the leap. So just kind of in closing, I think I've raised a couple lessons or pieces of advice in that description of my journey, but I think definitely don't fixate on career paths, rather chase opportunities for learning and for inspiration, and to kind of trust yourself that it's going to piece itself together. Another piece of advice would be to attend the other panels that are set up, because nobody really knows what the future of this work looks like. It's so much in transformation. There's so many opportunities kind of in the private sector to do purposeful work internationally that you wouldn't have expected previously. It's all kind of figuring itself out. And so to be open-minded and see what other kinds of opportunities are out there. And so I guess to summarize, kind of follow your heart, open your mind, and become a consultant. Actually, that's not super inspiring, but I don't know, embrace the unknown, and definitely reach out if you have questions about anything I've talked about.
Great, thanks so much, Lucas. Really appreciate it. Moriah, can you go next for us?
Yeah, so I'm Moriah. I graduated in 2015. I, like a lot of BC students, did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps right after I graduated. So I was in Oakland, California, and I was working as a case manager for seniors, 55 and older, who were homeless and struggling with mental health and addiction. And it was a very formative experience. And at the end, I kind of was reflecting, and what do I want to do? Do I want to be a social worker? And kind of felt conflicted because I was an international studies major. And I did ultimately decide to focus more back on the international side of work. And so I had interned for a small NGO called Pencils of Promise when I was in college, before my senior year, and then through my senior year remotely. And I ended up reaching out to them, and they had a short-term position in Laos. And so I had studied abroad in the Philippines in college, and I felt semi-comfortable with Southeast Asia. And so I was like, okay, like I think this is it. And I did want to go abroad and spend some more time abroad. And I was finding it difficult to find a position, an entry-level position that would let me move abroad that wasn't, a 2-year commitment like JDC International, or didn't already require you having like 5 years of experience living abroad. So I was like, okay, this is it, I'm going for it. I moved to Laos for about a year, and I worked in operations. So I worked on our team of about 35 people. There were 3 of us who are not Lao in the office, and just working with them to help them set up financial management systems and build out an employee handbook. And yeah, it was a really formative experience and good to sort of have a field office perspective of what are the challenges working for an NGO when you are located in outside of the US. So after I finished that, I decided it was time to move back to the US, and I just wanted to be closer to my family. I had met someone in Laos who had worked in Laos through World Education, and he encouraged me to look for jobs. I applied for a job, an entry-level job there, and thought I was interviewing for the Asia division, and was like pumped. I was like, this is my area. And then the last round, they're like, okay, you're going to talk to our Uganda team. And I was like, oh, okay. So did like a lot of quick research, and I was like, oh God, I need to have talking points. So I ended up doing sort of like similar work as a program associate, doing like operations and finance for our Uganda team at World Education. And so I have been there for the past 3 years, and I'm now a program officer, and I work on our Uganda and Eswatini projects. World Education sounds like it would be very straightforward in terms of education projects, but we're actually a subsidiary of a public health consulting firm called JSI. And so the work that I do is actually sort of at the intersection of like public health and social protection and education. So I work in program management on a few different projects across those 2 countries. Some examples, I worked on a big USAID project in Uganda that works with the government of Uganda to build out a case management system that connects households with vulnerable children.
You had you told us about JSI, and you were and that you're program manager along the education and public health axis.
Yeah, so a couple of different projects I work on. I work on a big USAID project that works with the government of Uganda to build out a case management system that connects households with vulnerable children to HIV testing services and other programs that mitigate risk to HIV and gender-based violence. I work on a project in Eswatini that works with young men to increase uptake of voluntary medical male circumcision, to reduce HIV risk. And so sort of a wide variety of roles. And then in terms of my actual responsibilities, a lot of it is budget development and monitoring, working to reduce fraud risk, working to prepare technical and financial reports for funders, just sort of general project management stuff. And yeah, I think I would echo what everyone else was saying about not worrying if you have like the dream job or what you think is a perfect fit after college. I think especially in the first 5 years after graduating, and I think it's really beneficial to just have a job and figure out like what your strengths are, what your interests are, and not worry about it being the perfect job or the perfect place you would like to be after graduating.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Moriah. Terrific account there. Let's go to Jack next, calling from Washington, right?
Yep. Yeah, so like some of the other panelists here, my career path wasn't a straight path coming right out of coming out of undergrad. But right now I work as a research fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. We're a small nonprofit think tank in DC focused on defense strategy, military operations, and defense budgeting. But coming out of BC, I actually took a job, and I graduated in 2008. I took a job working for a property and casualty insurance company as an analyst. So very different career field. But in some ways, I wanted to see what the private sector had to offer. And also the job was in Worcester, Massachusetts, where my then girlfriend was finishing up her last year of undergrad. That girlfriend became my wife, so that decision paid off, thankfully. And once she finished school, we ended up moving down to Washington, DC. I took a job with the South Korean embassy as a researcher. It's a relatively low-level position, but it allowed me to get kind of the lay of the land in DC. But after a while there, I was just getting a little restless, and I knew that since I was in my mid-20s, it was still a good opportunity for me to move abroad. So I ended up going to Taiwan for a year for a language program. I got some funding from the Taiwanese government to enter into that language program, so that was helpful. And then I went into grad school right after that at Johns Hopkins SAIS. So while I was at SAIS, I had a couple of internships, one with the FBI, one with the Treasury Department. And when I was at SAIS, I was mainly focused on security studies and China studies. And that kind of functional and regional pairing was very helpful for me and a couple of opportunities after grad school. I worked for a defense contractor that was focused on China's defense science and technology industry. I did that for a couple of years, and that helped lead to my current role now at CSPA. So for career advice, I have a few points. Like some of the other panelists, I'd say, don't be too worried about your first job. Get what you can from that opportunity, and you can always pivot later, and grad school is an excellent pivot point. But don't rush into grad school. I know the economy is not very good right now. It's tough to find a job. If you know what you want, great, but don't waste that opportunity too early. You know, you can get some experience now and then use grad school as that pivot point. And then finally, don't be afraid to take risks. So, you know, I up and left DC and moved to Taiwan for a year. It actually paid off. In your 20s, you can try to experiment in a lot of different ways with different jobs or careers. Don't be afraid about trying to find that one path that works for you.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Jack. So, I mean, it's really interesting to see the cross-cutting relations here. We've got education and public health mixed in with some business and consulting, national defense, security studies, all in the pot here. Let's finish up with Kristen Kelly, and then we'll open up for conversations. Kristen, thanks so much for being here with us.
Yeah, of course. So I have a little bit, everyone has a different story. Mine's a circuitous path as well. To give the spoiler, I'm actually an emergency medicine resident now in New York City. I graduated medical school in 2018, and so been a little bit busy these past couple of weeks, but my whole path kind of, interestingly enough, prepared me pretty well for what's going on right now in our city. So I was an IS major, was also a Spanish major, an econ. I have a little bit of an interesting story because I feel like I got pretty much what I thought was my dream job right out of college. It was the recession in 2009, and there was an opening at an organization that I had worked at previously, like done a summer internship at, called AmeriCares, which is a nonprofit humanitarian aid organization based in Stamford, Connecticut, with a global focus on medical aid delivery across the country and also emergency response. So one of the Latin American associates was going to grad school, and so they had an opening only for that reason. And so I kind of snuck in, luckily, even though they were having a hiring freeze. So I went there, was a program manager for the Latin America and Caribbean team. We worked with partners in Latin America to assess needs from their hospitals and clinics, and then deliver donated goods, like Katie's company, it sounds like, from pharmaceutical companies, medications and medical supplies. And then we also responded during natural and man-made disasters, such as, earthquakes and hurricanes and that kind of thing. I guess I've been kind of followed by disasters because the Haiti earthquake happened about 6 months onto my job there. We did not have our emergency team because of cuts due to the recession. So the Latin America team kind of took over that role, and a lot of things shifted and actually provided a lot of opportunities for growth really quickly for me. So I was able to kind of move up in the ranks and did a lot of work there. Loved the work that I did. It was not very good pay, as a lot of NGOs and nonprofits. And in terms of looking forward, I knew that in order to get into higher level positions, I either had to go to grad school or do something else and come back or something. So started thinking about grad school and what that looked like. And I ended up having a mentor who kind of saw that I was interested in medicine while we were going to all these hospitals and clinics abroad, and kind of put the bug in my ear. I kind of thought the path to medical school had closed after I graduated, not doing pre-med, but learned about post-bac programs, ended up leaving AmeriCares, doing a post-bac program, research year, going to medical school, blah, blah, blah. 10 years later, I'm here. So in terms of the international piece, I'm a resident at Elmhurst Hospital in Mount Sinai in New York. Elmhurst is the most diverse zip code in the United States, if not the world. I use Spanish probably 95% of my day, both at Sinai and at Elmhurst. And I don't feel like I've left the international studies behind. I kind of feel like I'm just doing it on a more local scale now. And that worked for me. Working abroad with AmeriCares, I found to be, this is kind of going into the advice, but a little bit lonely traveling. It sounds really glamorous, but when you're working, it's not as fun. And I think maybe some of the other people can speak to this too, but I kind of prioritized family and wanting to be close to them and kind of long-term goals. So kind of fed into my decisions. A few advice things I think people kind of already said. Obviously the path is not linear. You may get thrown some curveballs along the way, but just say yes to opportunities as they come. People are asking you to do things because they see something that you might be good at or think you might be interested in. So it's worthwhile to think about why they're asking you, and to, you know, take those opportunities as they come. It's also never too late to change your mind. I remember thinking like not wanting to do Peace Corps right after college because I was like, oh no, 2 years, that's so long. Things could be so different. 10 years later, you know, I started medical school when I was 27. So, and I was not the youngest one, or not the oldest one. So it's never too late. The last thing is a little bit different, but something that I felt like was really important for me to hear a couple of years ago. And I just wanted to pass this along, especially for the females that are graduating. I think I was really involved in the Council for Women at Boston College and like really interested in getting female role models. And someone told me a couple of years ago that I thought was really interesting, that all of your mentors don't have to be female. I think that's an obvious thing, but a lot of times the people that are in the powerful positions that you want to emulate are males. And so to kind of only be, you know, narrow-headed and looking for female role models, I think was kind of blind of me. And I think some of my most impactful mentors have been men and have helped me get to where I am. So a little bit different, but I just thought it was worth mentioning.
Thanks, Kristen. I mean, that last comment resonates. Definitely our program remains about 60 to 65% women, sometimes a little higher even, and the international studies major itself. So it's helpful to hear advice related to gender relations as well in the profession. Let's start by opening up to any of the students who are out there. Did those, any questions from students in the room? You can always pipe in on the chat as well as raise your hand. Professor Nakazato, would you like to get us started? Thanks for being here today. It's great to see you.
First, yeah, thank you for all logging in. It's good to see all of you. It has been quite a while since some of you graduated. It's nice to see how you're all doing now. Generally, interesting question I guess I have is that because a lot of you ended up going to grad school after the fact, I mean, what considerations do you have for the program you went to? You know, to what extent was funding an issue? I'm just curious how you all calculated the pros and cons of the program you ended up in. Because I remember writing letters of recommendation for Katie. She actually emailed me saying, hi, I'm actually former pre-married name. And I said, yes, I remember that name. And we went back and forth, and I didn't realize you ended up doing the program you did. So in that sense, I'm just curious, because there's so many graduate programs out there. What I'm asking is, how did you sort of discern this is what's right for me? Because it costs money, it takes time. So just to all of you, you know, just when did you decide that's the right fit? That's the question. Anybody want? Yeah, sure, Katie.
Yeah, go ahead, Katie. You can start, and then anybody can jump in.
So I knew that I wanted to do public health. And so, you know, once you pick sort of the area that you want to go into, then we do what we all do. We look at the rankings to see sort of where the best places to go are. And so the program I chose, I did for a couple of reasons. One, it's considered one of the best public health programs. Also, it's really focused on global public health, which I knew I wanted to do so that I could kind of swing back into the international sphere. The other thing is doing it in Europe. A lot of the master's programs in Europe are 1 year rather than 2 or 3 year programs. And I did the master's when I was a little bit older. I had worked in consulting for 7 years and decided I wanted to shift. So a program that was a bit more condensed was really important. And then the third factor was programs in Europe sometimes are a bit cheaper than the US programs. So all of those things kind of came together, and that's why I ended up where I did.
Great. Others want to jump in? Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I went to Johns Hopkins SAIS. There were a few considerations. So one is, you know, was I looking for a career in policy or versus academia? And for me, I wanted to go a policy route, and that gives you a certain subset of schools. I also was someone who checked the rankings to see, you know, which schools had a good reputation. And then as I started to look through that list, size of the school mattered to me. So, you know, I didn't want a program that was huge, but at the same time, if you go to a very small program, it really limits the number of classes that they can offer. And if you're looking for depth in one particular area over another, then it's important to know, how many classes do they actually offer there, how many experts they have on staff who I'd be able to work with or learn from. And then location really matters. So for a career in policy, for foreign policy, international affairs, national security, most of those jobs are in DC, which is good and bad. Having a grad school experience in DC really opens up a lot of internship opportunities. You can have internships during the school year, not just during the summer. If you were going to grad school out of town, that would be your only option as a summer internship. So just the number of connections you could build being here in DC was also important to me. So those were my major driving factors.
Go ahead, Lucas. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll maybe just add, I'm headed to business school, and that might not be a path that's of interest to a ton of people who are listening to this panel. But if it is, I would just say, don't be discouraged by the price tag necessarily. I think a lot of people are, and for good reason. But if you do want to do work that is public sector, social sector, whatever it is, if you're not trying to go into investment banking or something like that, there are pretty amazing loan forgiveness programs with a lot of these business schools, and there's great financial aid at a lot of the top schools to begin with. And so I wouldn't just rule that out as a path if it's something you're interested in. And then if I do go ahead and add a policy degree, to get the two of those by just adding one additional year is pretty great bang for your buck. So there's just options to consider if those are things you're interested in.
Anybody else want to say anything about grad school before Moriah?
I'm starting a grad program in the fall. So it's been on my mind a lot, actually, and I'm doing an MPH MBA. So I echo what Lucas was saying about business school, and I was looking into a lot of programs, and it's cool that there is an investment in attracting people who are interested in social impact or working in the public sector for these loan forgiveness or repayment programs. I ended up choosing BU, and I got offered a full ride, and so that was a big consideration for me, but it was also important to be able to do both degrees, and BU has a very streamlined MPH MBA program. So funding was a big consideration, and then just like how well the two degrees integrated together was a big factor for me.
I don't really have too much to say, although I probably did the most expensive route possible with postbac and medical school. I did consider, I took the GMAT, I think I took the other one for grad school. And I think at that point, I think I would just echo, I think it was, I forget who said this earlier, but graduating in the recession, I think I was a little bit nervous always about financing, and kind of had to look at the bigger picture. I know a lot of people that went to grad school right after we graduated, during the first recession, because there were no jobs, and that was just kind of like a stepping point. And then afterwards, they kind of had to do, they had to do the same thing kind of over again and start again, because they still didn't have, an idea of what they wanted to do. So my recommendation is to not take the decision lightly. When I took the GMAT, I clearly didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I think it took me another 2 years to figure out that I wanted to go to medical school. So I think it is an investment, and it's expensive. So I would just make sure that you've thought through kind of all of the different factors before you do that. And you don't need to go to grad school either. There are plenty of people that don't go to grad school, so. Of
course. Yeah, thank you. Kristen also mentioned earlier in your original comments a bit about one aspect of working abroad is the loneliness factor. Was it you? Yeah, I think it was you who said that. Would others like to speak to your the experience of living and working abroad, how it shaped your values, how it shaped your experience, what were some of the hardships, but also some of the rewards that came with it? Go ahead, Jack.
I can quick. So for me, I had gone abroad in undergrad for a year, my junior year in Beijing. And then after working for a couple of years, I went to Taiwan for a year. So I had those two experiences. I think study abroad experience, that was great. You're going with a large class of other students from the US, probably maybe some other Western countries. So it was very easy to make friends through that route. When I went to Taiwan, I kind of had that experience again to an extent because I was in a language program. I could, get to know my classmates and all that. But my so girlfriend became fiance, now wife, but she was my fiance at the time. She came with me as well. Her experience was a little more difficult because she was working while she was there, and kind of in a whole range of different jobs. And it is a bit more difficult, working in certain foreign countries to really connect with people there. I think expat communities can be a little weird going from place to place. So it can be at times a bit lonely or difficult to meet people. But that said, I think, living abroad is a really unique experience, and you'll always carry that with you through the rest of your life. A lot of people just don't really have a very good understanding of what life is like in different countries, and just having that perspective, I think, really gets infused in a lot of conversations or decisions that you'll be making.
Thanks. Any other reflections on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was just said. The only thing that I would add is I think living abroad, for me at least, I'd be curious. I want to see head nods if people agree with this, but certainly my experience was, especially doing it, spending a sizable chunk of time so young. I was 24 when I moved to Johannesburg, 27 now. It felt like it very much accelerated the process of kind of discovering and accepting and committing to kind of who I am, right? And like what my values are, who I want to be, what life I want to live, because you just are completely freed of a lot of influences that are maybe weighing on you in ways that you never even realize when you're back home, when you are kind of surrounded by family, people who've known you for a long time, friends, certain expectations, cultural or otherwise. And so being away for me was just especially being away and not being with a significant other, being alone, is plenty of time for reflection to really understand who you are, free from all of those kinds of constraints or influences. I saw a few head nods, so I guess folks had similar experience.
I would also add that it sounds like a lot of the panelists have also worked in some difficult areas. Not everybody's working in the developed world. And I think while it does enhance sort of the person you are and what your own value system is, I think sometimes when you go to these really difficult situations and you do see some things that are really, really emotional and really in some ways traumatizing. And so I think that it's important to keep a balance and to remember why you're there, what your purpose is, that you can't solve all the problems that you're encountering, but you are helping in some ways. But I think that, sort of protecting your own mental health and keeping some distance, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think Katie makes a really good point. I think one of the challenges, there are many benefits to working abroad, seeing the world and getting to do, work that you might not have been able to do otherwise. But I think, it kind of put things in perspective for me that I wanted to, change the world and work everything on a macro scale. And then getting into kind of hospitals and clinics is where I realized like how much the doctors, like having a one-on-one interaction with someone and that relationship was something that I really craved. And while, now that I'm having that one-on-one relationship, I obviously want to work towards the policy changes and the macro things. So it's kind of like a grass is always greener. I think putting things in perspective is definitely something that working abroad does. The other thing I just want to say is this is not to dissuade anyone, but just, the reality of things as a woman, blonde-haired, white, working in Latin America, not in the places that, would normally you would go and travel to. I was kind of, a slave to the people that I was working with, and they were the ones that were driving me around. They were the ones that were taking me out, and there wasn't a lot of, exploring that I could do. I could do it on my own, but I was also not taking the same risks that I did when I was abroad, when I was on, my own time and my own, dime. But, when you're working, you have to represent your your company, and you have to represent, you know, and be safe and make good decisions. So I think some of that kind of, you know, freeing experience of going abroad. I studied abroad in Ecuador, and it was amazing, and I would highly recommend it. It's just very different when you're working for an organization instead. Wouldn't change a thing though, but just things to think about.
Yeah, thanks very much. One of the questions that Professor Nakazato asked at a different session was around what coursework you took at Boston College, or what programs or experiences you had while you were in the program, particularly the IS program, but also, you know, across Boston College, that gave you something that you find essential or useful now, whether it's an ethos or a skill set or a direction.
Language. Definitely gonna say Spanish. It's gotten me through, you know, it's definitely put me in a position higher, you know, higher than others by keeping that up and by using it. I think it's by far the best, you know, part of my education that I came, well, sorry, not the best, but one of the most important pieces. I think also, I'm just trying to remember what courses there were 10 years ago, but I think that ethical questions and just being a liberal arts major in general, you know, like the conversations that we had in those classes about ethical dilemmas and thinking about, you know, all of the different pieces that come together, especially right now during this crisis. I think I just really value having that opportunity to think kind of more broadly about the world. It's nice to have that experience and those memories.
I think a lot of what I really value about the IS program is that it doesn't just focus on the political or economic aspects, but also a lot of the cultural and, as you mentioned, Kristen, the ethical and even to some level the religious components that are driving people. You know, the work that we do in Africa, particularly around public health, there's a lot of danger of sort of rumors and conspiracy theories, and that puts people's lives at risk. And so trying to understand sort of the rationale and the way that people live their lives is extremely important to building trust in communities that a lot of us work in.
I think, yeah, I think just a very diverse, like, you know, culturally and economically and politically. And I think there's no way you're going to be an expert in every region of the world. But I think IS did a really good job of equipping me with how to learn and how to understand about different political systems, and gave me the tools to kind of do the work on my own. You know, I switched from Southeast Asia to Uganda, and I didn't know anything about Uganda, but just kind of having a foundation of being able to do the work myself and understanding sort of just like the region. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I think yeah, I think it just gives good tools and a good foundation to start off with.
I also just remembered one last thing that I want to say. I think it also sparked an interest, and I think part of my kind of growing pains and deciding to go into medicine and kind of leaving the international humanitarian aid world behind was realizing that international relations and studies could still be a passion of mine, and political science, and it didn't have to be necessarily the work that I was doing every day, because when it became work, it was less, you know, fun for me. And so, you know, now that I have a job that I love and I can now pursue the international piece and the political science piece on my own time and in my own interest, like Moriah was saying. So just because it's something that you study doesn't necessarily mean it has to go into the work that you did. It can just be a passion project as well.
I'll add one quick thing, which is just that I am an infinitely better citizen for having gone through the IS coursework. I think it's kind of amazing how often I find myself going back to, shout out Professor Krause, back to the frameworks that we learned in that one class in that one semester, when I'm looking at how the US is dealing with North Korea or China or Iran, and thinking about escalation theory and like very specific concepts that help you understand really, really complex topics that are important for our country, our democracy. So I find myself almost every single day kind of thinking back to some of the stuff that I learned in those courses.
We'll pass along your thanks to Professor Krause. He'll be delighted. I think most of you are more than a few years out now. All of you, I think, are more than a few years out, and you've had time to. You're telling us that you've had time to sort of find a calibration point or a balance point, or in what in philosophy sometimes they talk about a reflective equilibrium, where things move in one direction or another, and finally you find a correspondence between your values and your way of life, way of living. And I wonder if any of you would like to reflect on that, about how that's come to be, or what that looks like to you at this stage in your careers in life, the sort of ways of exercising your core values, and how it relates to the work that you do. Because we know that some people, just as a cliche, work to live and others live to work, right? Sometimes you do things during the day in order to enable the passions that you have, or that your investment, your moral and social personal investment is elsewhere. And for others, it's exclusively in the work zone or something like that. And I wonder if you all had thoughts about finding the spot that you're in at this stage in your life.
I guess I can say that the past couple of weeks have really tested whether, the job that I'm in is the right job for me. And I think a lot of my coworkers kind of feel the same way. But at the same time, the opportunity to be in this position, I value. I think one of the things in thinking about kind of the equilibrium that I always say, is that it's still a job at the end of the day. As much as I enjoy my patient interactions and everything like that, no matter what you're doing, you can love your job, but there are always going to be things, that drive you up the wall, with management or people or anything like that. So I think it's just finding, the balance of what work allows you to still be the person that you want to be, and hold the values that you hold true. I work with underserved populations on a daily basis, which was really important to me. I, get to use my international kind of background, and I get to think about the social determinants of health and other things that, are important to me. But I also get to have a life because I do shift work, and, there's a balance. So I think it's important to realize that it's still going to be a job, even if it sounds wonderful on paper. There's always going to be things. So just make sure, I think when I mentor medical students, I tell them when they're looking at a program to think about all the bad things about that program, and whether those are, things that are enough that you can overcome because of all the things you like about it. And so I think that's the same thing in thinking about a job and career.
For me, I think thinking about values in my career, that was something I started struggling with almost immediately after BC. As I mentioned, I worked for an insurance company for a year afterwards, and I just had real trouble finding meaning in that job. I know we all need auto insurance, we all need renter's insurance or home insurance, but it just wasn't doing it for me. And I think through that experience and a few others, I realized that I really want to focus on policy-related issues in international affairs, and that's one reason why I'm at a policy think tank now. And some of these issues I care about pretty deeply. I think over the last few years, we've seen more and more why the U.S. preserving liberal international order is very important, especially considering China's rise. And for me, in my think tank, we're focused on long-term competition and peacetime and potentially wartime with other great powers, especially China and Russia being the main two that we work on. And for me, I find that work very meaningful and important, because if we don't preserve existing balances of power, if we don't uphold our alliance relationships and push certain norms and standards that we've helped to develop over the last several decades, then I think that the result will be very bad for the US and for the world more broadly. So that for me, those are the values that I'm working towards right now and are very important for me in my career.
I had the very similar experience to Jack. I was working in insurance as well. And, you know, just spending every day, that's what you do for the majority of your day, what job you have. And if it's something that doesn't really fill you with any kind of joy, or you don't really see the purpose in it, after a while, many people might be able to continue. I just wasn't. I needed to do something that I really felt mattered to the world around me. And I think that was one of the things about Jesuit education that I really appreciated, was to say, what are you going to contribute to the world? What is your unique contribution to the world? And for me, really, insurance and healthcare consulting wasn't doing it. And I think that also, you know, now that I'm at a different stage of life, I have kids, I want what I'm doing to matter enough that it's more important to the world than the effort I can put into my children. And so I want something that is going to be impactful. And I think trying to find that, whatever that is for you, I think is something to pursue.
Thanks so much, Katie. Anybody else want to jump in on this? That's okay. Professor Nakazato, do you have a last question before we let people go? Or of course, any of the students that are here, also is a good time to ask extra questions.
No, I'm fine. I think it's good seeing you again, as I said, and I'm glad you're all flourishing in your post BC lives. That's important to us to make sure you're set on an upward path. So yeah, nothing to add.
Thank you. This has really been great. I appreciate your openness. Zoe, before I wrap up, then let's get Zoe. Sorry, go ahead, Zoe.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm a senior in the IS department. Sorry, I had to come in a few minutes late, so I didn't get to hear most people, but I am really interested in global health, and I'm hoping to go to medical school in a couple years. So I'm planning to take 2 gap years, and right now I live in Portland, so I'm back on the West Coast, and just being in Boston away from my family for 4 years, I really want to be here for a year. At least a year, and then so I'm planning to stay here in Portland and work, but then that second gap year before I go to medical school is kind of still up in the air, and I'm a bit worried, I guess. I don't want to lose my passion and interest in work in global health, so it's been really nice to hear what you guys have all decided to do, but I was just wondering, I guess, if you have any suggestions maybe of places I could go or things I could pursue for that second year before I go to medical school, so that I could still kind of hold on to that humanitarian global health aspect of what I've loved about my undergraduate career.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think I wouldn't worry about it. You know, I took off 5 years. You know, I didn't know I wanted to do medicine, so it wasn't really like a gap year. So I wouldn't worry about planning it, just, you know, everything out just yet. You know, if the job that you take next year turns into 3 years, turns into, you know, something else, and you realize you don't want to pursue medicine, that's fine. Or if, you know, it's 1 year and you're like, I really want to get started, I'm itching to go, then you go. I wouldn't put, you know, a time frame on it. If you find something that's interesting to you, follow that. Don't worry about, I would really encourage you to take as much time as you want before medical school, because it is all consuming. And, you know, I had a great 9-to-5 nonprofit, didn't pay a lot, but I got to enjoy my 20s before I went to medical school. And I think that a lot of the people that I went to medical school with who were in their 30s or late 20s had a much better experience, because we knew who we were as people and knew what our priorities were, knew when, you know, to stop studying and to, you know, have a beer and, you know, things like that. So I think the older you are when you start the process, it's obviously harder depending on what you want to specialize in. But it's really important, I think, to kind of figure out who you are before going into medical school, if that makes sense.
That's great, thank you.
I would also add that global public health is multidisciplinary. So there are lots of ways to be involved in that don't require you to go to medical school. If you're not 100% sure that that's the path for you, you can participate by, being an economist, by being a political scientist. There are epidemiologists. There are just infinite number of career paths in public health. So, spending the time to figure that out, what exactly you want to do, I think is worthwhile.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else want to add on to that before we wrap up? Okay, thanks Zoe for the question, and thank you all to our panelists for your openness and your honesty about your path, and for your willingness to be a mentor to our students, both initially here with this conversation and on an ongoing basis. It is the greatest gift that you can give our students to be a mentor and to share your experience. And that means a lot to me as director, and I know it means a lot to our students as they move through this experience into the big bad world off the heights. So your conversations about what you've taken with you from Boston College, as well as the decisions you've made since that time are really helpful. So thank you all so much. We'll be doing more of these, of course, and I look forward to keeping in touch with every one of you on this panel about our future alumni events and things like that. But also, I hope you'll keep in touch with us about your life changes, challenges, successes, all that good stuff. You've got great things going. So thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you guys another time. Bye-bye.